I've seen beyond the bounds of infinity and drawn down demons from the stars.
I would like to preface this by stating that I'm a Roman Catholic who has experienced paranormal phenomena since I was 5. My late grandmother had experienced similar phenomena, and my mother and sisters also, but to a much lesser degree. As I get older, I notice the experiences are slightly darker in nature. I know very little of demonology other than what has been referenced in the Bible. I tried to stay away from anything referencing demons, the devil, etc., which is why this experience was so difficult and I was not prepared. In October 2018, I was admitted to hospital due to an electrolyte imbalance. I was in a room with 3 other female patients. On my second night, my arms were finally free of the IV, so I was able to move around and assist other women who weren't as mobile in getting ready for bed. One of the women was much older and cranky. She seemed to take an instant dislike to me when I first moved to the room, but warmed up to me after I helped her. When the lights went out, I decided to lay on my stomach and say my silent prayers. To the casual observer, I would have looked like I was asleep. During this time, I could hear the woman I helped argue with herself about me. She stated I was nice, and then she replied to herself stating that I am not what I seem or something to that effect, and it went back and forth like that during my prayers. Shortly after, the room started getting really cold, fast. I silently prayed to God to watch over her and to free her from any negative influences. It is then that I heard her say these words very loudly. "I don't know the Lord's Prayer, OP." I freaked out, processing quickly what had just happened. The woman knew I was praying over her, and there was no way she could have known that. In my mind, I knew instinctively that I was not up for the confrontation. I was weak and still recovering. I got up from my bed and, with my back to her, I said something like, "There is no way I can stay here now." To which she answered, "Yes, go. I won," and laughed hard. I was amazed that the other 2 women had slept through it. It was around 10 p.m. when this happened. The room was stiflingly cold at this point, and I ran to reception and asked to be discharged, but the charge nurse said I couldn't leave without my doctor discharging me. I begged again to be discharged, but was denied, and the nurses tried to calm me as they got a hold of my doctor, who said he would be in at 7 a.m. and I needed to stay put. I asked to be relocated to another room in the interim, but the only available room was directly next door, and that was way too close for my liking, so they put me in the day room with a blanket and a pillow. I used my phone to call my sister to get me out of the hospital. She works at another hospital and told me the car wasn't home and to catch an Uber to her place. The ward was locked down for the evening, so I couldn't leave anyway and stayed in the day room. The TV was on standby, but I could hear voices coming from it, even though the screen was blank. The voices talked about a shooting at the hospital I was in, with thousands of fatalities. It then talked about my baby nephew being in a plane that was shot down. By then, I was truly hysterical as fear for my family took root, and everything I learned went out the window. Throughout this time, the voices from the TV continued, calling me slut, whore, etc. I couldn't stay any longer in the day room, and the nurses had me on a stretcher right in front of the main desk, where the charge nurse could see me. It felt like a really bad dream, and I was hysterical and paranoid. I laid down on the stretcher, and that's when I noticed hanging overhead the ward number 66. I was also on the 6th floor of the hospital. I wondered if it was why there was so much activity there. Not long after, I started hearing other voices coming from different rooms of the ward, asking about me. They seemed to be communicating to each other and laughing. I started silently praying again with more conviction. A male patient in the ward nearest my stretcher started crying out for help, claiming I was hurting him. I prayed even harder, citing the Lord's Prayer. He asked the nurse for the name of the lady outside hurting him, and she gave him my first name. He started crying again, joined by another voice 2 doors down. I prayed to know who they were in Jesus' name, and all these voices talked at once, but the one name I could clearly make out was Beelzebub. I continued to pray throughout the night as they taunted, laughed, cackled, and cried. At this point, the light in the man's hospital room was turned on as a nurse was with him, trying to calm him down. I had been sitting up on my stretcher bed whilst praying and watched his silhouette as he tried to inch his way to the open doorway. It was then that I noticed the odd shadow he cast. It was so strange. It looked like a spiky-headed being with a dog. Spiky-headed in an almost cartoonish way like Bart Simpson. It continued until morning, and I was moved to a small private room, awaiting the doctor. The voices were still there, verbally attacking and threatening me, but my hysteria was long gone by that point, and I was just determined to leave. I ended up discharging myself before the doctor arrived, but had to return as I still had the IV catheter in my arm. On my return, they had placed me in another ward. I refused to go back to Ward 66, and I was able to recover in peace. And eventually, the demonic taunting stopped. I had a course of bad luck following that event. Basically, all of 2019 was a series of misfortunes of bad luck that still hasn't come right. I don't know what to do other than keep on keeping on. I went to a psychiatrist last December who said, other than the trauma I would need their help with, I was in good mental health. Any guidance would be very much appreciated.
So, there's something I'd like to share with everyone. The world is a strange place, and my life has always been on the stranger part of the normalcy spectrum. I've always been able to see shadow people. For the most part, they're there in my peripheral vision, but sometimes they're right before me, in sharp relief. I know it sounds odd, but it's true. They've never harmed me, never attempted to touch me, but they are just there. I think they're mostly benign. But there are other things, not so inclined towards goodness. These are the demons that sometimes follow me. I've had some pretty scary experiences with the latter. This is the first time I'm talking about this to anyone besides my immediate family and closest friends, so please bear with me. The one that always jumps out to me is from 8 years ago. For context, at the time I was a radio producer in a web radio in Greece, which is where I'm from and currently live. And my program was from 8 to 10 PM every Saturday, playing rock and metal music. That night, I had finished my program as usual and was walking home. It was sometime in winter, either late December or early January, because there were still Christmas decorations out. The street on which I lived was parallel to the boulevard, but at that time of night, and with it being so cold outside, it was really nice and quiet for once. So there I was, enjoying the night air and lovely stillness, when I heard footsteps behind me. I stopped and looked behind me, but there was no one there. I shrugged and kept walking, thinking it was probably my overactive imagination. That was until the steps started again. I resolved to just keep the same pace. Besides, I was only about 50 meters from my house. After all, it could just be someone who got out of their house, even though I'd heard no door opening or closing. I was determined to rationalize it and keep calm. And then, the sound of the steps changed, and it sounded like hooves. Two-legged hooves at that. That's when I knew it wasn't my imagination. It was a demon. My heart rate went right up. My hands started sweating. I ran the last 20 meters to the entrance of the apartment building, and only after closing the door behind me did I dare to slow down and breathe normally. Nothing came by on the street. It was gone. Whatever that demon was, I'm glad I never looked back. It was there, just to scare me, I knew it. That's what they like to do to me. Scare me witless. And they play a good game of chase or hide and seek sometimes. I know it sounds like too much, but I wanted to ask, has anyone ever had similar experiences?
I'm not sure what happened in my aunt's old house. It was in the mountains of Greenbrier County, West Virginia, specifically Alderson, the same town that Martha Stewart went to prison at. It was a new house in a small complex of other new houses, sitting on the side of a hill. We saw a lot of scary stuff there. The neighbors did too. It got a lot worse at night. Things walking around outside, 7 foot tall and black, with scraggly long wet hair and red eyes. When you would see one, the streetlight would somehow still be on, but no light up where they were standing, as if they were soaking up or blocking the light. Sometimes, thousands and thousands of flies would land on the side of the house and along the banister in the deck, but none would fly inside. There was a farm above us that raised goats. On several occasions we would see several people in the field behind the old farmhouse in hooded robes, burning a huge fire. Then the next morning, one of their goats would be dead, hanging from a tree in a black trash bag. Once, we went to investigate, and we just found some long metal rods in the ashes of the fires. There was one particular energy we felt inside the house. It felt like it wanted to murder you, and we would get thoughts in our heads on what it wanted to do. We named him Daniel, and my aunt lost her mind back then, and still isn't right because she said Daniel was raping her and harvesting her eggs. She isn't right in the head anyways. I think she has schizophrenia like my dad. But when we all see the same things, it has to be real. I would wake up in the morning and her mattress would be half off her bed and she'd still be asleep. There was a rocking chair in the living room that always rocked on its own when you walked into a room, like someone just got up, even though there was no one there. One time, my cousin fell asleep on the chair and woke up screaming and grasping his neck and yelling he can't breathe. As soon as me and my Aunt Diane ran into the room, he said it stopped, and after 10 minutes he had blisters around his neck in the shape of fingers choking him. We had a Polaroid of the blisters, but she can't find it anymore. She probably threw it away. We would take a video camera and just walk around and record rooms, and you could see blurry outlines walk by all around the house. It got to the point that we all slept in the same room. Only I could never sleep. I just laid there praying that whatever was in the closet would leave me the hell alone. The good thing was that when I left, it didn't follow. I could go home and feel safe. Until I turned 13 and I was laying on my living room floor watching TV, and something sounded like it landed on the roof, like a tree fell. I got a really bad feeling and looked up at the ceiling that had mirrors on it in the shape of windows. and I saw something run behind and around the couch. From that day, I didn't sleep for probably 10 months. I tried everything, but I constantly had the feeling that something was going to kill me or hurt me, and I always felt like something was looking at me. I tried using sea salt in the windows, holy water, sage, prayer, everything I could think of. Anywhere I went, it followed, no matter which family member I tried to stay with. I didn't sleep, because something would always be there as soon as I was about to sleep. I'd feel something touch me, or hear my name called, or a banging, or a light turn on by itself. Eventually, it just went away from me. I figured out if I ignored it, it would go away. If I didn't feed into it, I would feel nothing. It wasn't until recently that I put two and two together. This all started when my aunt first moved into that house and her neighbor's daughter was in her bedroom. She was my age. She had a Ouija board and we used it in the windowsill. Her inside the house, me outside. She told me to ask it a question and I did. As I went to ask aloud, she stopped me and said, "No, you have to ask in your head." I asked a question I knew she wouldn't know the answer to. I asked what my dad's middle name was, and it spelled out E-D-W-A-R-D. Edward. I freaked and ran inside, and from that moment on, we were tormented by whatever answered my question. I wonder if anyone else ever had this type of experience. I live in Phoenix now for nearly 10 years, and I haven't experienced anything since I moved here. Even after I stopped thinking about it back home, I'd still see the occasional shadow or light turn on. But here, I see and feel nothing. I'm happy.
For some backstory, my mother-in-law is a minister and is beyond religious. She doesn't lie and she doesn't embellish stories. This is her story. She's in her late 60s. For some odd reason, her husband, my father-in-law, and I are talking about scary things we've encountered. She doesn't like this talk. She doesn't want to invite anything. So she hardly ever joins in when we talk like this. For some reason, this time, she chimes in, and she has a story. She was young, maybe 5 or 6, in Korea. She was very sick for days. The doctor kept coming to the house 2 or 3 times a day to check on her. During the 4th night, her fever got so high that they put her in the living room, with the windows open and a wet rag on her forehead. Her mum slept on a yo next to her, which is like a mat/bed. She could have been hallucinating, but she insists this is what she saw that night. She was startled awake by a growl. She was dripping with sweat and shivering. She could hear her mum next to her, but also a weird noise like scratching or dragging up above her head out of sight. She was too scared to move. Then she felt something pull her hair. Not a tug. She says it felt like several little hands grabbing at her hair and yanking as hard as they could. It made her cry out in pain, and that's when she saw them. About half a dozen little black creature men coming from the shadows in the room. Not like they were hiding in the shadows, but as if they were the shadows. The shadows turned into these men. They were not fat, chubby, pointy hat-wearing gnome-like men, but all black shadow creatures with sharp claw-like hands and sharp teeth that grinned ear to ear. They jumped on her chest, scratching and clawing at her. They continued to scratch around her chest and pull at her hair and jump up and down hard on her chest, snapping and screeching and almost laughing at her. She said the sounds they made were horrible. They growled and screeched at her for what felt like hours, but she was frozen with fear. She couldn't scream or cry or get them off of her. She was so scared, she finally passed out. The next morning, she woke up to the doctor doing his morning check and asking about all the little scratches on her neck and chest. They didn't have cats or dogs, and her mum had been there all night but heard nothing. They said she probably scratched herself trying to get the blanket off when she was overheating. My mother-in-law said she tried to tell everyone what the little men had done, but they said not to mention such things. These creatures were as black as night, had yellow eyes, pointy hands and fingers, skinny legs, very demon-like, and came from the shadows.
I want this to not be very long, so I'm going to really just jump into the situation. I'm not really sure if this is correlated, but my mum did a lot of witchcraft and messing with the other side growing up. So we honestly grew up always knowing ghosts were real and seeing shadows, things falling, hearing things. All of the classic signs were really nothing new. Spirits have always followed our family no matter where we've gone, and we never really lived in fear of them. When I was about 17, 7 years ago, I was really depressed with my relationship, and I was the one making effort. I was getting cheated on, all of that. But it was my first real love, and I was blinded by it. One night I'm sleeping, and I get woken up by my significant other. Keep in mind, we did not live together. It was common for my SO to sneak into my room, usually when my mum was asleep, so it wasn't really weird. So I get up and I'm like, "What are you doing here?" We're basically having a normal conversation for a few moments, and my SO keeps saying they're ready to change. They realize how much they love me, all of this. I buried my head into my hands, confused but also happy to hear all of this. Then the conversation was starting to change. They kept saying, "I'll be everything you need, and I promise I'll make a great life for us. All I need is your soul." I remember looking up at my SO and I was confused, asking what that meant. Typing this out for the first time right now has me tearing currently because this is one of the most intense moments of my life so far. So my significant other keeps promising me loyalty, money, love, all of this in exchange for my soul. I keep answering no, and then whoever I was talking to was getting angry. It was like a really fast shift, and it was like my SO disappeared almost, and then there was this black shadow almost going up my wall, and I felt this dark presence behind me and whispering in my ear. Except this time, it was my niece's voice, and she was crying and begging for me to just give my soul away. I started crying immediately, and I knew all of this was some sort of test or trick. I kept saying I wouldn't do it. What does giving a soul away even mean? Is it death? Selling a soul sounds like such a BS movie cliche. I sat in my bed, in the same spot, just crying for the rest of the night, confused and feeling worse. I know for a fact that demons will manipulate you when you're in a weak, vulnerable position, but I still have no idea what giving my soul meant and why I was getting messed with. Why this demon was disguising itself to me. I often think about what would have happened if I said yes. Does that mean yes? I'll never forget this night, and if anyone has any similar experiences, please share.
The town of Mount Hope is to be found just west of Middletown in Orange County, New York State, and was established in 1825, when I imagine the residents of the little community would have lived fairly peaceful lives. However, One night in 1866 would mark a stark departure from this pleasant norm for one family. A creature that can only be described as a denizen of the depths of hell was about to pay them a visit. It was March of 1866, and the residents of a nice little farmhouse in the town of Mount Hope were woken from their peaceful slumber by the terrifying sounds of a multitude of voices, seemingly singing a funeral dirge. This weird chorus lasted for half an hour before being abruptly replaced by a ghastly cacophony of frightful groans and shrieks, which roused not only the humans of the farm, but also the animals into a fervent state of terror. Whatever was causing this hellish phenomenon was just getting started, however. A sudden flash of light meant that the house was momentarily bathed in bright light, turning the blackness of the night around them into a brightness like that of midday, before every door in the house was violently thrown open by an unseen force. Fire and brimstone had come to Orange County. Coming stalking in the main entrance, a monstrous mystery beast plodded onto the floorboards of the besieged farmstead. Its motion was one of swaying from side to side in frightful contortions, and it was described as being neither man nor beast. It had, albeit in huge and distorted proportions, a human-like torso and a head with a single eye. Its hindquarters were terribly elongated and reeking with mire and filth, and were said to resemble those of a monstrous animal. The heady smell of phosphorus seemed to emanate from the cyclopean spectre's body. As if on cue, the final burning candle in the house suddenly blew out, plunging the house into darkness. Billowing forth from the darkness came a large volume of foul smoke, apparently from the eye and nostrils of the hellish fiend, which soon completely filled the room and made breathing almost impossible. On the verge of suffocation, the hounded homeowners would only sink further into their waking nightmare as the monster, still exhaling yet more toxic smoke, let out a deep, guttural groan, and proceeded to run its allegedly scaly fingers over the faces of every single terrified personage in the room, with, quote, provoking deliberation. With a ferocious screech, which shook the entire house from the foundation to the rafters, the monster suddenly darted out through the open door and ran out towards the forest, where it was quickly lost to the inky blackness of the ebony night outside. There would be no sleep in the house that night. When morning finally came, there was very little evidence left behind of the ostensibly infernal visitation, save for some small particles resembling crushed lava found along the path that the monster had taken into the forest. The pervading smell of sulfur and phosphorus hung thickly in the air, and this was enough to demonstrate to the inhabitants of the hectored household that they had not, indeed, been dreaming. I wrote this article, but I found the information from a scanned copy of the New Albany Daily Commercial, which was originally published on the 4th of May, 1866.
Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. A huge thank you to Deadly Cure for joining me on this one. If not by now, then sometime soon. There will also be a collaboration we did on his channel, so be sure to check it out. A huge thank you to all the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. Links to everything will be in the description below. And as always, thank you all so much for your continuous support. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.